So welcome back to our channel. Today we're going to be discussing cull bucks and the importance of managing them. So we wanted to let you guys know, to our first 1,500 subscribers, we're going to be doing a giveaway. All you have to do to get entered to win is email this email address right here and send us a picture that shows that you're subscribed. And then whenever we're ready to hold the contest, we'll have a deer head on display, and you guys will get to estimate the score of the deer, and whoever is the closest will get a choice between a nested backpack, which comes with a set of climbing sticks and a tree stand, or a top-of-the-line Reconyx trail camera. So what is a cull buck? A cull buck is anything that you perceive to be inferior to your management plan.
Yeah, I can remember back in the 90s hearing about guys down in South Texas where they were shooting anything less than 10 points. The overriding population of bucks down there at 3 and 4 years old had 8 points. And they were trying to promote multi-tine deer, you know, those 10-point, 12-point bucks and better. So by calling out the 8-pointers, 9-pointers out of the population, the goal was obvious, that they wanted to have more bucks in the breeding population that would pass on genetics with, 10 points or more, rather than having the 8-pointer be the predominant buck in the area. It's my understanding that within 10 years, they started to see results from this. In fact, it's still going on today. I've got a good friend of mine over in Kansas, and he manages some really big ranches. They're still doing that same, calling today, and he's told me time and time again how quickly it actually changes. It doesn't take that long before you start seeing some results. Now, I'm not saying it's something that happens overnight, but within a few years, they're seeing results from this. So I've heard a lot of guys out there talk about, well, there's no way you can change the genetics in a wild deer population. The first thing I want to say about this is I'm not a biologist, so this is just my opinion from observations in different parts of the country that I've personally witnessed. And I'll use this one area as an example. There's a specific county, most people have heard of it, in west central Illinois. And this area has been heavily outfitted for 25 plus years. And I'd like to ask you to stop and think about that for just a little bit and consider what might happen in a situation like that, where basically every property is being hunted, either by outfitters week after week. By this area being heavily outfitted, the remaining local hunters have been kind of forced into seeking out other areas to hunt that they may not have hunted in the past. So basically, unless there's an anti-hunter landowner in that area, it's being hunted by someone. So in that situation, what you have is a really high number of hunters that a lot of them are going to shoot 150-inch deer. So your really good genetic 3-year-old bucks are being shot. And that 4-year-old cull buck, like this deer right here, he's probably not a trophy to a lot of those guys, so he might be passed. Or worse yet, a buck like this. This was actually a bully buck that Blake shot here. Was this your first buck ever?
Second buck.
Second buck, back when you were 7, 8 years old. And this buck was a bully buck on the farm that we were managing, and he just had a bad attitude. He was running off a lot of other more better genetic deer, and so my point is, that's not a trophy to most guys that are going to travel out of state to go hunting with an outfitter. They're going to pass that buck up. And so you get left over with a lot of these inferior genetics or undesirable genetics that live to be older bucks, and less of those good-looking 3-year-olds that have really good genetics reaching maturity. And I can tell you that some of these types of areas have really suffered, and I just gotta wonder, if 25, 30 years of that kind of hunting pressure on a wild population of deer, I can't see how it wouldn't change it. If you can change it in less than 20 years in a high fence, and I know that's a controlled environment, but if you hunt a specific county in a certain way, in a way that is a controlled environment too. It's just a bigger area. So it may take longer, but what are our kids gonna see in another 40 years or 50 years from now? Yeah, we might not see a change in 15, 20 years. It might be so small of a change in a 15-year period that it's hardly noticeable. But what happens after 40 years, 50 years down the road, where this is the predominant type of buck that's doing not all of the breeding, but a lot of the breeding. So it's a big concern for me for the future of deer hunting. Again, I'm not a biologist, but I know how fast they were able to change the genetics in a high fenced environment, and also know that some of these areas have been pounded for over 25 years, and the predominant buck that's being shot is a 3-year-old with good genetics. It's got to have some effect, right? Yeah. I mean, we're not shooting these, but we're shooting these good ones over here. It's got to have an effect, at least in my mind. Again, this is just my opinion. So when you guys are out there, looking at these good-looking 3-year-olds, it's one of the most important things is understanding how to age a wild deer in a hunting environment. That split-second decision, you're managing for 170, 180, 200-inch deer is what your goal is. The last thing you want to do is mistakenly shoot a 3-year-old that you think may be 4 that has good genetics and hasn't even come close to reaching its potential yet. That's going to have a negative impact on your goal.
There's some other things to consider when calling bucks, like injuries. Injuries can and almost always will cause abnormalities to antler development. So this is not a result of genetic traits. Therefore, removing that buck that might have one antler that's abnormal isn't necessarily going to affect your management plans in a positive way.
Right. Antler abnormalities caused by injury. It does not mean that buck is, inferior and needs to be called. He might have great genetics. And just because he was injured in a fight, or maybe a hunter put a bad shot on him, it can throw one side of the rack off where it's not typical. It just may be, like you said, a spike, or the other side may have 9 or 10 points on it. Now, the exception to that would be if the deer in question with the injury, prior to having the injury, had undesirable antlers, meaning poor genetics. Well, in that case, yeah, that deer, I would consider that deer a call buck, most certainly. After 30 plus years of managing multiple properties in our home county area, I've seen a considerable change in the quality of the deer in this area. The number of mature cull bucks has increased, and the number of mature bucks with good genetics has decreased. So here's a picture of this buck right here, the year before Blake shot him. As you can see from this picture, he did not grow very much. He didn't change very much at all. Actually looks like the same deer. Maybe this point right here is a little longer. I don't see anything else that's really, and I think maybe this point here might be a little shorter the year before. Regardless, short beams and short tined, just not the type of genetics that I want to see where I'm hunting. Here's a picture of a 7-pointer. Now we did hunt this buck and actually ended up getting a shot off on him. We never could find him, and we never saw him again. Unfortunately, we just didn't recover him. But this is the type of genetics that have become really common in our area. I mean, there's not like a overabundance of these, but you can have one or two of these on every property pretty easily from year to year. And I mean, this deer is at least 3 years old. Heck, you know he's doing a fair amount of breeding. It's not what I want to see where I'm hunting. You know, not if I'm going to be a trophy type manager. Here's an example of 2 3-year-olds. In my opinion, the buck in the rear is the type of genetics that I want to see in my area. At 3 years old, I would do everything I could to protect that 10-pointer. At the same time, I would be targeting this 7-pointer here in this picture, the deer in the front. That's just a really good example picture of a buck with good genetics and a cull buck, in my opinion. Both of these deer are 3 years old. We know this deer really well. But anyway, yeah, very cool picture. Here's a picture of a 6-pointer. You shot this buck, didn't you, Blake? Blake shot this buck with a crossbow. And I mean, just another prime example of obvious, very obvious cull buck. This buck was at least 3 years old. And, you know, heck, even if he was 2 years old, which he's not, he would need to go because he's never going to be, you know, very much. Will he be maybe an 8-pointer one day? Possibly, but he may remain being a 6-pointer.
So take a look at this deer, the size of his body and the size of his head compared to the antlers. They almost look out of proportion, and that's a cause of the buck not having good genetics.
Yeah, this is a buck that's obviously got poor genetics, in my opinion.
So here's an example of a really old buck, 4 or 5, possibly even older. He's got really short beams, and he really has a rack of a 2-year-old.
Yeah, look at the body on that thing.
He's probably over 250.
Yeah, and in this picture, he's by himself, but his ears are laid back, so obviously there's a deer out of view of the camera. And I remember this buck. This has only been a few years ago, and I remember this buck. He was very hard to see. We only had a handful of pictures occasionally of him, but he was always pushing everybody else around. I gotta believe with that kind of attitude, he was doing a lot of breeding. Here is a picture of a mature deer, a 3 or 4-year-old. I would guess him at 4, but it's kind of hard to tell in this picture. He just doesn't have much going on, you know. He's just an 8-pointer. Looks like he broke off one of his 3s there on the right side, but he's just a weak rack. Again, not desirable to, you know, raising trophy deer. These are the type of bucks that are being passed, you know, and that's where the problem comes in. Here's a picture of a bigger framed 8-pointer. A lot of guys would consider this a trophy buck, and he is an older buck, no question about it. But if I'm trying to step up my management plan, this might be a buck that I would try to target. You know, treat a kid to a buck like this that might be tickled about it, you know, or maybe even a friend doesn't have the opportunities to see deer like this. Just another example of the type of bucks that they were shooting down in Texas. You know, doesn't matter how big he is, if he doesn't have 10 points, take him out. Here's a buck that we wanted to highlight because he was kind of the boss on this one property for a few years. And I guess the first year I kind of overlooked him and just didn't recognize him as what he was. He was very energetic. He was bouncing all over the property. He was always in the chase. If there was a doe being chased, he was involved. I have to believe that he ended up doing a lot of breeding. And then the next year was kind of a repeat. Didn't get an opportunity to shoot him. And then he was again on the property another year and basically did not grow a single inch from one year to the next. I mean, he's got like a miniature size frame. I've seen 1 and 2 year olds with racks as big as his. So he's just, in my opinion, he's got very poor genetics. I mean, he's never going to be a trophy deer. You can see in this picture, it's kind of blurred, his antlers are, but you can see his deep chest, 75 degrees, and he's on his feet. Look at this picture. I mean, just a tank of a body. His neck is swole up. I mean, tell me that deer ain't 4 years old. This is him the year before, and as you can see, he just didn't change very much at all.
Alright, so that wraps it up. Hopefully this video will give you guys a little bit of a better idea of what bucks you want to be calling out of your herd. And as always, thank you guys for watching, and remember, hard work is more reliable than luck.